My name is Kyle,
My name's Allison.
and we're here to do a book review for our two books.
So my book is Walking with the Wind by John Lewis.
My book is Letters to a Young Muslim by Omar Saif Govash.
Oh. So how did you like your book?
I liked it. It was an eye-opener into the Muslim community and the Islam religion for me.
Oh, really?
Yes, the author goes into it explaining the history of his religion, but also messages and concepts that he hopes that can be carried on to the future generations, especially his sons. Most of these chapters are actually dedicated to letters to his son.
Oh, that's really nice.
What about yours?
So basically, this is an autobiography of Congressman John Lewis, and it just kind of goes over his life. So it starts off with his childhood, like what kind of life did he have, which it was a very, very poor childhood. Like he basically had like a bunch of siblings. I forgot that exact number. But they lived in houses where there was no air conditioning, no heater. There was like, in one of the houses he lived in, it was like, there was like holes in the floor. So if it was wintertime, they had to huddle up by the heat, like by the fire kind of thing. And but they were very connected to each other, their family, their community. Like, so it was definitely nice in that way, but yeah, they were pretty poor.
Very similar to my author. He began poor as well, and community was one of the strongest ties for him in his life as well. For him, though, one of his biggest bits in his book is the fact that his father died when he was 6.
Oh.
He was assassinated, but not being the target of the assassination. He worked at a high-profile position in an embassy, and a lot of his messages in this book is writing about how he was searching for a role model to replace his father, and how a lot of it came to be on his father was who he imagined to be, because as a child grows up, you have to fill in a lot of the blanks.
Right.
Which I felt carried to some of his exploration later on in religion. I'm not much of a religious person myself, but there was a lot of aspects in here that I really liked how exploring it, because I was quite ignorant on a lot of the Muslim community before this book.
Yeah, no, same here. Like, I'm also not religious at all. But in some way that's similar to that book. John Lewis actually is very much into Christianity, is very much into the teachings of Gandhi. There's another philosopher that he mentions quite a bit, but I don't know how to pronounce his name. It's like Thoreau. Thoreau.
Okay.
But like that, but they're all very like, he's very into peace and harmony and like trying to like get everybody together, which comes up a lot when later in life, like he's like part of this like a resistance group, I guess you'd call it, like the SNCC?
SNCC.
Yeah, it's like stands for, I forgot what it stands for. It was like Student Nonviolence. Sorry, I don't remember.
A peace movement of a kind, though.
Yeah, it was like, it started like when he was in college. And he would kind of ended up becoming chairman at some point, but like a lot of it is just like these like demonstrations, I guess, of just like him and like a group of people would like sit at the counters, like at these diners, even though like they know they're not supposed to because of their color. So there would be like waitresses who would say like, we can't serve you here, like you need to go. There was like one instance actually where they stayed seated at this one table in like a diner, and the manager comes out and tries to kick them out. They still stay there, and then he closes up the shop, and then he locks the door, like the front door, which was glass, and then he brings out like this machine that has like these toxic fumes, and they're like trapped in there. Yeah, it was like really messed up.
Damn. For my character, he saw, not that way, but exactly that situation, but running into difficulties with other people judging him based off initial appearances, for him mostly his Muslim religion, and also even within his own communities because his mother was Russian.
Oh.
Which didn't give him that true Arab bloodline that he seemed to have found often in the communities where he was growing up. And a lot of it for me, it was also sorry, to continue with that line of thought, there was bits too where he went to the UK and he went to a local mosque trying to seek, spiritual enrichment from like-minded groups of people on it. But when he got there, it turned out to be, it was like a militia recruiting group. They're handing out flyers with guns and saying, if you see these Muslim leaders of this type, shoot them. And it was crazy. And it was the first time that he went to a Christian service afterward, after he was invited. And he said, like, if any other Muslims found out that I went to a Christian service, like, he could potentially be killed for that.
Oh my God.
So there's a lot of violence dodging in this. I feel like not violence dodging, but a lot of ways.
Like threats of violence.
Yes, there's a lot of ways you could end up dying just for speaking out in a lot of communities. And it's crazy that for a lot of the topics that we would think would get you killed, he can talk about them in this book in a very diplomatic way. He opens up very slowly, very cautiously into, formations and peaceful ways, and looking at violence rather as like, how can it do good for you, but questioning it more so as, do we need it? Is there a better way than violence?
Yeah, no, same with this book, where he's just like, I don't want to be involved in violence at all.
Mm-hmm.
There's also another person that he mentions quite a lot as like someone who's like a foil to that ideology, which is like Malcolm X, who was like another speaker, but he was much more like, how would I say this? Like more like angry, but and like wanting to take their freedom by force through any means necessary is like the line that he used.
It's very similar to what our author talked about, people, especially the suicide bombers, where justified violence in their perspective.
Right. No, let me see. Yeah, and then it was sad then that the same Malcolm X like ends up being assassinated later in the story. Like I forgot who. I don't know if it was ever said who killed him, but because there was like the same happened with. So here's a fun little, not fun, but interesting fact that is actually connected to the book.
Mm-hmm.
So they mention one, let me back up a little bit. So have you ever heard of the movie Mississippi Burning?
I have not.
Okay, so it's basically, I forgot what time frame it was, but it was like, it has Willem Dafoe, and the basic plot is that three members of the SNCC ended up going out to they were part of they wanted to get voting rights for black people, and there was three guys in particular. I forgot two of their names. One was a black guy, and then the two were Jewish guys. I am actually distantly related to one of the guys.
Oh wow!
Yeah, his name was Andrew Goodman. What ended up happening to them though is that they ended up all three got murdered.
Oh.
Yeah, because what ended up happening is that it looks like that they went to a rally or some sort, or they were investigating something. They went to jail, and then after they got released, 4 days later, they went missing. So, because John Lewis kind of briefly mentions this in the book, like a chapter, but what ends up happening is that they go to this church, to try to figure out what happened, because I think that's where they were supposed to go there themselves. It was also Ku Klux Klan territory, super bad. Yeah. And so he was trying to figure it out, and then the guy, or one of the people that he was talking to, was like, "Oh, I don't know what happened to them. Nothing, maybe. I don't know. I'm not going to tell you." And then he ends up going through this forest area, and he does find bodies, but it wasn't the three. But it was still definitely members of there's a lot of death in this book, but I did find out later, because it never stated who killed them, the three in the book, but it was stated later, because this was written in 1995.
Okay.
The guy who had at least had a part in killing the three just died last year in jail. He only got arrested way later, because he was also, not shockingly, sadly, a Ku Klux Klan member. I forgot what his name was, but yeah, it took years to actually find him.
And my author, the radicals he covers is mostly ISIS, the Muslim Brotherhood a little bit, and some those other movements. And the one thing he talks about these is that how in Islam, so far, there's no real voice that can speak for all of Islam. So when you have, because it's such a wide community across so many cultures
Right.
and countries, and he was raising an issue on how you have groups like ISIS saying they speak for everyone, but there's no one really countering them. And I found out a lot of this book that it's bringing awareness to Muslim situations on what they can do with their bit, rather than, well, at some point, some people will say like, oh, blame the West, because we do get involved in there, definitely, and that's its own can of worms.
Right.
But this book definitely aims at addressing the issues today in Muslim communities through what they can do and speaking up and having voices for that. So it's definitely this rising of crazy groups, kind of like, the KKK having to do with that. It was definitely interesting how, sorry, I have to grab one of the paragraphs actually I saved for this.
Oh no, that's fine.
So taking some notes. So one of the first quotes that I took down was, "It stops the healthy and free flow ideas that is so vital to mental health and intellectual vibrancy." And he was referring to this of how having this perspective of not looking at something strictly violent, strictly halal or haram, allowed or not allowed. And it would, I'm mumbling up here, but he promotes a lot of free thought.
Right.
For that, and rather than looking at it as something as haram and like black and white, like that's bad, you should not think about that, you should not deal with it, just get rid of it, that's not the Islam way. He encourages a lot of like, well, look at it, understand it, question it, poke at it, and address it rather than just throw it away, which is very counterintuitive to a lot of the experiences that he tells as a child and growing up.
Right. No, that is interesting. I think that's definitely how more people should be, of just like, don't just take everything for what it is at face value, but question of just like, why?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why is this the way it is? And is that still a good, is that a good thing?
Exactly.
Because because I definitely know some people who are definitely more of that, like, I'm not going to think about this, I'm just going to go along because this says so. Like, not, like not just like criticizing like religion, but just anything really.
Just the following ship.
Yeah, like just like the sheep like mindset, I guess.
One thing that disturbed me when I read this, he was saying how a lot of the Muslim community, like 70% of them are illiterate.
Oh,
That's a very large number.
That is.
That's very dependent on other people who interpreting text for you and telling them what they mean and trusting that. And I hope literacy is on the rise, but when I found that, it definitely painted more of a picture of what kind of a community they're dealing with.
Yeah.
I mean, not only are they going across all these different cultures and aspects, they're also going across different types of capabilities and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, definitely. 70% though, wow.
Yeah, it's very large.
That is.
One of the other quotes that I looked at, I saved a total of 6, just because they're mostly near the end. I found towards the end of this book, I was really finding just these little lines like, that's a good way of looking at it, or that's a good way of summing up this aspect. Such as on page 125, Saif, I think, addressing his son, "Our convictions are undermined by our evolving perceptions. This simply means that the rigidity of the worldview that we are taught as children loses its validity as we mature." And I found a lot of his message in here were definitely taught to the children who were starting to ask questions, but not necessarily knowing where to ask those questions, especially in a place where asking questions can be reprimanded pretty negatively.
Right. No, I think that's actually really interesting. Yeah, for this book, one thing that stood out to me, I have a lot of pages dog-eared because I didn't have enough time to really write them down. But there was definitely some moments that really stood out to me of just like, I guess it was just mostly like, for every time that they were trying to do a demonstration of peace. Because John Lewis and his group were, like I said, were never violent. They never did anything. Like they just were trying to be, I don't know, like, it was like one where, or another one where they like, I forgot where it was, but it was like, this one moment where they were talking about police brutality. And they were saying, like, it was being described as like people with like white people with like hoses or cops or firemen or something, were like firing these powerful hoses at people, and they would just like knock the protesters like down the street, like they'd be flipped and just thrown aside. It was just like, holy crap. So, like, it was just like a lot of moments like that, and it just kind of made me realize, like, even though that, yes, like, this did happen, like, I knew that, but I guess I never really realized how just horrible it was.
It's something I feel like you can only really experience there, and hopefully never again for the next generations.
No, for sure. And I guess what struck me too is that it wasn't that long ago, 1960s. Like, my mom and dad were like born like 10 years later. That's not that long ago. So I guess it just kind of, I know this may seem so silly, but I guess it just, when you think about it, it just, for me, it was just like, God.
I mean, someone alive back then is still alive today.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Still
Like,
than that.
like my grandmother was around during that time. And even like, another thing that was interesting to me was that, reading this during, cause I believe February is Black History Month.
Yeah.
So I guess it was kind of like, I've never really paid much mind to like what month it was for like in terms of history, but it was interesting to kind of, in a weird way, to just like participate. Of course it was for school, but still it was a participation for like Black History Month. It was kind of interesting in that way to me.
Huh, I wonder if there's a Muslim month.
I don't know. I know there's like, I think there was what was it? There's an autism month, and then I don't remember, but I know there are like other ones. But I'm curious to see now like what else is there so I can participate again, because I thought that was kind of fun.
Right. One of the other quotes that I wanted to bring up for this is regarding. So at one point he grew up in a very structured life. He went to church, he memorized the Quran, and he's very has a lot of conviction to his religion, and he gets a lot of enrichment spiritually from it. And there was one story where he goes to England, same time when he was at mosque, but he was taking college classes, and he found that everything was up to him. He could go to class or not. It was totally up to him. He just had to be a professor once a week, and having that loose of a structure was very different for him.
Yeah.
And he talks about how a lot of these people are coming up in these very structured lives with very rule of what you can and can't do, and then when they're given freedom in places like that, sometimes it can go kind of crazy. He actually mentions a number of times the problem of the Muslim devotee who will be very pious and they'll be religious for a certain amount of time, and then they'll get that fulfilled, and then they'll go off and fornicate with other people. They'll just go live this life of debauchery for a little while, then they'll feel guilty and come back, and it's a rinse and repeat cycle between those two states.
Yeah.
So when he was experiencing that the first time, he had written on page 157, "Freedom is good that is preserved and defended because it places individual responsibility at the heart of society. Freedom is not presented as a gift to self-destruct or to engage in moral acts out of principle. Freedom is a gift to use your will and perception, to impose moral structure on yourself." And he found that after he visited Mecca, because he was having a hard time fitting in, and he said, "I'm going to go for Ramadan." And it was a great experience for him spiritually there, but he realized that he wanted to actually leave college and stay there and just become a Quran professor, someone who interprets the Quran and recites it, but he realized that he was escaping from his problems. And that kind of ties into one of those other things here. Suicide bombers are a terrible thing, and violence for it. But Islam has a lot of contextual backing to fight the enemy, to strike down those who are needed it. But Omar poses a different perspective of it's braver to live in a world and to face the challenges rather than to smite it and to vanish like smoke.
Right. No, I agree with that. Well, like, I had something else I wanted to talk about, but I'm trying to remember. Actually, I did find find the thing, SNCC. I don't know if I said that or.
Yeah, you mentioned it.
Okay, yeah, because it was like, I don't know if I dog-eared it, but, because I have like a bunch of stuff that I just dog-eared. One thing that was interesting, like now looking back at this, or thinking about it again, was that at some point, there were white people who joined the SNCC, But it was kind of interesting how Black people like reacted to this. Like there were definitely some who were okay with white people joining their group movement, but there were definitely those who were like, we don't want you here. Which kind of ties in with like that whole segregation thing, like again, but in a way that's different. It turned like eventually like what ends up happening with the white people, like they have their own little faction like within SNCC. I think it was called Core. Like it had their own like little separate section. So it's just kind of interesting. I mean, John Lewis's take on it was just like, I mean, it was just basically like, I don't see the point of this, but okay. It's just, we'll probably go back to racism again. But I mean, I could see that like the people who were opposed to its viewpoint though, just like, okay, yeah, like with all this like white, like this brutality against these these people, and like such rampant discrimination. Like I could see the anger and like wanting to direct that at something. I don't like. I mean, I'm not saying that it's completely justified, but at least I can understand it.
Right.
But like, but yeah, that was something that stood out to me too. Just like, yeah, I could see that.
8 minutes left about it. So one of this was, how does our books play into diversity today? And I think for mine, Omar, he states at the beginning, though these are letters for his son, this book is addressed for any young Muslim who's seeking questions in the world. I think this could be a book that's very relevant even in today's context, because I think it will take some number of years for the Muslim world, as they culturally go through their issues they're currently going through right now in the Middle East and such, that this book I think is quite relevant for these days. A lot of people can benefit from today, and even for me, someone who doesn't have really a positive view towards religion, and I'm very ignorant on the Middle East and matters regarding Islam, this really helped bring a very positive eye-opening and understanding to it. I know I'm only scratching the surface of the entirety of stuff, but it's really cool to see a positive-minded person trying to troubleshoot this issue in a way that really speaks of values that I personally like in the world, in the future. You know, Star Trek values, treating others, and holding an scientifically open mind and looking at things. And I think that will carry this book probably a little while forward into the future, and hopefully people in the next couple decades will still be reading it.
No, definitely. For me, like as someone who obviously is who is Caucasian, I think it's important for me to like recognize that I do have white privilege in like this society, and to remind myself, not on a daily basis, but pretty often of just like I have that privilege, and I like my most likely, well, besides Andrew Goodman, like for the most part, like didn't have to like deal with like what John Lewis and Malcolm X or Martin Luther King had to deal with, like actual like threats like against their person, and then just the awful discrimination that they had to go against, and how they fought for their freedom and voting rights and everything, like with their blood, sweat, and tears, basically. I think it's still relevant today. I think it's a good like reminder of what America of what they had to do, and also look at the negative side of America, and like try to say or try to teach ourselves like we need to make this a better country for everybody, and make it a safe place where everyone can feel welcomed and happy and safe. And then, I feel like I had more to say, but I guess not.
I know this is something I'm going to be coming up with. I should have mentioned this.
I know.
There are so many aspects to this book. For me, it was mostly just how well worded he was at poking at problems that I wouldn't feel comfortable trying to open in conversation. Like I don't even know where to begin when someone says like, well, the infidel needs to die or something like that. I don't even begin where to disarm that. But he goes at it quite well and really focuses more on your own self-perception and trying to understand the problem. Because a lot of the things that a lot of people, Western ideals, that a lot of the communities over there are trying to like shun, like, oh, that has nothing to do with Islam. All your knowledge is in the Quran. You can ignore everything else. He sees that as a way of running away from the world, because if you hear a problem and then ignore it, it's just going to sit there and stew. You can't evolve or mature it or even look at it in its entirety and then set it aside, you know, with a contented heart about it. So I'm glad to see peace images like that.
No, that is really nice. Yeah, have you ever looked up the author himself after reading the book?
I have not yet.
I haven't looked John Lewis up, but I have seen him twice on television since reading this book. It's very strange. He was at the Super Bowl for a minute, and then he was at the Academy Awards, presenting an award, and I was like, the timing is just perfect on this, because I never heard of him prior to reading this book.
Mm-hmm.
So seeing that was just like, is this perfect? Is this a perfect coincidence, or what is this?
I'll have to look up. I imagine my author is still alive and hopefully doing well with his family. I know he's been definitely tackling a lot of issues in the political world there. I believe he works at an embassy now.
Oh, okay.
But I could be mistaking that with his father. That was quite earlier on.
Right.
Yeah, it was definitely an interesting read on this, I have to say.
Yeah, no, it's a good book. It sounds like a really good book. Are you gonna read anything more like that later? Or something similar in that vein?
Possibly. I think it's opened my eyes into that. I'm normally a reader who seeks for entertainment, but
Right.
I think it definitely is. The one last quote I wanted to bring up with him is that, and this is something that I thought really speaks, for addressing how humanity is going to face things in the future. On page 196, we cannot rely on what was achieved by a previous generation. We need to reacquire knowledge with each generation and push its boundaries out further. And he wrote that, I think, after covering the issues, he did it earlier, but kind of settled it, bring it back up, of how a lot of Islamists today are trying to fall back to a 7th or 9th century Islam, where they viewed the world as better then, but it was also farther back, technologically, educationally, academically, and a lot of other aspects. And he puts it as, it is your duty to take care of yourself and also to acquire the knowledge, because, like you said, you can't rely on the previous generation.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely a nice pen letter to future things, which I'm always down for future humanity progress.
No, same. Yeah, what's funny is that it kind of reminds me, have you ever heard of the Amish community?
Yeah, I know the Amish.
Okay, so yeah, they're definitely because I've seen them a couple of times, because they mostly live in Pennsylvania, but I think they've moved since then, or starting to move, because they become a bit of a tourist attraction, which they don't like.
I can imagine.
Yeah, they really don't like that. But there was something you were mentioning earlier about basically praying and then doing the whole debauchery thing.
Mm-hmm.
They also have a similar system where it's called Rumspringa, which I had to do a project on years ago. So basically, Rumspringa is a thing where if a kid turns 16, they're able to do whatever they want, live wherever they want.
I've heard of this, people leaving the Amish community. Sorry to interrupt.
No, don't worry about it. Yeah, they're just able to do whatever they want, be the wild child that they've always wanted to be. But they also have to make a decision after a certain point of just do you want to stay be a wild child forever? I mean, or do you want to come back? Because if they say they want to stay and be don't not return to the Amish community, they cannot go back. They are shunned.
Outcasts then.
Yeah, their family can't talk to them. Nobody in that community is allowed to interact with them whatsoever. Basically, I mean, they can come back, I think, but until they make that decision, they're shunned.
At least they're given that option, though.
Yeah, they still have that, but it's still a harsh kind of thing. Yeah, there was a lot of people that didn't do very well. But I guess that's kind of the point, though, too.
Yeah.
But it sounds very similar. Also, you were mentioning it, but what was can you explain more about the Ramadan? I know this was something.
I don't know very much about it. I just know it's a religious. It lasted a week or up to a month. I just know it's an event, and what it is he visited Mecca, and he was saying he speaks very highly of Islam, and he gets a lot of enrichment from it. And he was saying how it was just amazing to see just thousands of people in white robes 24 hours a day, 4 weeks, just in and out on this huge courtyard.
Oh.
And it's just, for me, I think what caught him the most about about Islam is that you could be a CEO or a peasant, but when you're there at the actual place and worshiping, you're the same. And he kept remarking how wonderful of a quality that was, where we're all the same regardless of our social status out that, and trying to bring that binding of connection together.
Oh, that is nice. Because yeah, there's definitely like a difference between like, let's say, like in society's eyes at least, right? Like of like a truck driver versus the president or something.
Very different.
Yeah, very different. Like where it's like, most people like society's eyes, so like there's no comparison. Like there's a huge gap there.
Well, that Varm is the 30-minute. This is our book project again.
Yeah.
I'm Kyle Johansson.
And I'm Allison. Thank you.
Thank you.